First, I would do exactly the same thing as I did before. So I create a new document that has a proper size. So I go to my film and video presets, and here, for some reason, the first one is the HDV 720, and here's the HDV 1080. It is a bit weird because it's called HDV 1080, but it doesn't have the size of an HDV. That is an Illustrator. But when we scroll down, we see we also have an HDTV, and I would suggest you use this one. I don't know why we have that one up here. It doesn't really make sense to me. So the HDTV 1080 down here and create. Now, when we choose a preset based on a film thing, we get all these guides here, and they look a little bit familiar. So we see also here we have these action and title save guides, but we don't really need them. To turn them off, we simply hold down Shift-O to switch to the artboard tool, which is over here. And in there, we have the option to turn these guides off that we don't need. So we only are left with the rulers, and I forgot where to turn those off, but I don't care, they are not in the way. If you are annoyed by the transparency grid, you can turn it off by hitting Command-Shift-D. Now, in Illustrator, I can then create elements, and there's pretty much no limit. So everything that you can use in Illustrator, you can just use, and it will be imported into After Effects without a problem. But I will stick to something fairly simple, like this is some text. And, and maybe I have a circle here and here, and an element here and here. Art. I feel really bad that these things always look so crappy. But in the next classes, the things will look a bit more impressive. All right, so I could save this as an Illustrator file and call this one Art2 on my desktop and hit save. Now in...
What about just brushes? Just strokes?
Also no issue.
They appear as a stroke?
No. So in Illustrator, we really just have separate elements that are merged. So from Photoshop, we have things like adjustment layers that are taking over, or layer styles. In Illustrator, nothing is taking over. So everything will be like a smart object that you've imported from Illustrator to Photoshop. So there are no other special properties.
So Illustrator works better with After Effects because it's the vector program? Or?
It always depends on what you want to do. I wouldn't say better, it's just different. They have like their strengths and weaknesses. Alright, so when I save this, I already did, and I go over to After Effects and I want to import it, Art2, I again get the same options, although right now I don't get any options, which is weird. But when I take a look at my layers, I only have one layer. So After Effects will also only see one layer. In Photoshop, everything is already on layers, so After Effects can import them. Illustrator has a different way of structuring things. So by default, we have different elements that are grouped inside of a layer. So when we only have one layer, then After Effects also only detects one layer. And then there's nothing to import. So we'll just import, bless you, the file itself. I could create another layer and take my text and drop it in there. If I now save this, go over to After Effects and I import it again, now I do get options for it, because I have multiple things that I can import. Here I get the option to import it as footage, that we know already, and as composition. For some reason, it looks a bit different than for Photoshop. So we choose footage or composition, and when we chose composition, we have either the option for document size or layer size, which I think makes a bit more sense. I don't know why Photoshop looks different. So we say we want to import it as composition, and if it's layer size or document size, it's the same functionality as we know from the Photoshop file. So when I hit OK, same thing happened as before. I have the 2 layers as separate imported Illustrator files and my art here. When I double click it, I don't see anything because the background color, or an artboard doesn't have a background color. So After Effects just uses the default color for the composition, which is black. So when I have black on black, I don't see anything. But when I turn my transparency grid on, then I can see the elements are in here. And I can see I have my layer 1 with the proper boundaries and my layer 2 with somewhat proper boundaries too. Now, if I want multiple layers, so if I want all these elements here separate as well, that would kind of be annoying if I have to create a new layer manual all the time. But Illustrator has a function for that. I will just do it first, afterwards we can do it together real quick. I select the layer that I want to separate. Here it is important that you choose the layer and not just the contents. Alright? So in Illustrator there's a difference. We can either select the element itself in the layers panel, or we can actually select the contents of it with a circle. So these are 2 different things. I could have the rectangle selected as the element, but as the content I could still have all elements selected. Then the functionality doesn't work. So important is that the layer 1 itself is selected and not the contents. Then I go to the burger icon. Why does it have 4? It's a big burger. It's a Big Mac. Then we'll go to Release to Layers Sequence. There are 2 options. We either have Release to Layers Sequence or Release to Layers Build. I think they are named the wrong way, and I'll show you first what build is and why that is weird. So if I choose build, I get multiple layers. So here I have layer 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. If I hide all the other layers and only show layer 6, which is my first element, if I only show the next layer, I see I have the first and the second element in it. In the next layer, the first, second, and third is in it. I'm not sure why you would ever need this, but hey, it exists. So the alternative is Release to Layers Sequence. Now we really have, as we can already see in the preview images, one element is now one layer. However, if I try to import it, it still wouldn't work because in the end it's still just one layer. So I need to grab the layers, drag them either outside towards the bottom or towards the top. Now layer 1 is empty and I can delete it. I don't know why this has to be so complicated. Now I have these layers here and I can export it again, or just save the file, go back to After Effects, delete it, import it again, composition, layer size, and now I can see I have every element as a separate layer. Alright? If I wanted 2 or more elements kind of as a group, I would need to make sure that these 2 elements are still inside of the same layer. So now my layer 3 contains both of these boxes. So if I import it now, I then also have, both of them merged as one element. Alright? Good. Now, let's do something like this together real quick. And then we can explore some things that we can do with Illustrator files that are superior to an After Effects project file, a Photoshop file. So, let's create a new document. Go to Film and Video and choose the HDTV 1080 preset. Hit OK or Create. Then we probably want to get rid of the weird guides that we are having. So you can hit Shift O to go to the artboard tool, and you can turn off the guides up here. Then if you don't want to see the transparency grid, you can hit Command-Shift-D. Then we can create some elements. What sort of elements doesn't really matter. So I'll just write something again. Maybe I'm a bit more creative this time.
How do you get the white background?
Command-Shift-D.
Command-Shift-D.
Hello with you. See?
I already have an idea how I could animate this. I would do it really fast, in the fast 5 minutes. All right. So do we all have something?
Yes.
Great. So let's make sure that everything is on a separate layer. So we go to the Layers panel. Make sure that the layer 1 is selected. It's important that not this is active, but it's really bluishly highlighted here. Then we can go to the burger menu and choose Release to Layers Sequence. Then we have all the separate elements as layers. Then we can select all of them by shift clicking, and then you either drag it down at the bottom, or if the layers panel is not large enough, you can also drag it just above the layer 1. The layer 1 then is empty, so we can just delete it. So in the end, we should not have one root layer, but instead all the separate layers like so. So far so good? Great. Alright, so we can save this. Maybe I'll call this one Art3 on the desktop and save. Then back in After Effects, let's import that. So we choose Art3, open, then composition, layer size, and OK. So composition and layer size. So we should have on the left hand side a composition called art2, and down here, ew. Oh wait, After Effects has detected this as a sequence, so this sometimes happens. Can you take a look? I always forget that it does this. So when I import this, I will realize I have these things here. So what it does is, it detects, alright, so I have one Illustrator file that's called R2 and one that is called R3. So it thinks, I'm sure this is an image sequence. So we'll import each layer as a sequence. So when I take a look at the layer and turn on my transparency grid, I can see on the first frame, this is some text, and on the next frame, it's the other one.
Just because the file names are almost the same?
Yes. Or because they are the same file name with a sequential number. So when this happens, this sort of sucks. What we then need to do is, when we select it here, it's sort of hidden. When I select my file, I go to the options, and I choose that it should not be imported as a sequence. Then I hit open, composition, layer size, and now I can see how these are not sequences anymore, and instead actual layers, and I get all the layers that I have in the file. So there's something that, kind of an issue that sometimes happens. Alright, so when I open this up, you might want to turn on the transparency grid so you can see something, or alternatively, you can hit Command K to go to the composition settings. And in here, we can change the background color to white. So far, so good? We have 20 minutes left. I want to animate something. So the next part I will do fairly fast. You can try to follow along or don't. But important is that you listen and watch. You can do it together or not. But listen, most importantly. When I have my Illustrator file here, and I have, for instance, this is some text. And let me just single view it. I have no idea which layer it is. Probably the one at the bottom. Great. When I single view this and I say, maybe I want this to be larger, I scale it up. But when I am at full resolution and I zoom into 100%, I can see how this is super blurry and shitty and weird, which makes sense because I have scaled the layer up. And by default, elements are imported from Illustrator at a certain size. After Effects doesn't have vectors. It's like Photoshop. Even if we have a smart object from Illustrator and Photoshop, in the end, what we see in Photoshop is still a pixel version of it. We can scale it up, then the vector is recalculated with the new pixels. But in the end, Photoshop doesn't have vectors. It's always pixels in the end. In After Effects, it's the same way. We always have pixels. And what it imports from Illustrator is also just the vectors, converts it into pixels at a certain size, and then it uses them. So when I select the layer here, I can see it imports that layer, and it is the size of 1620 by 277 pixels. So when I make it larger, it scales up that pixelated version. However, we can tell it to not do that. And that is with a function that is called continuously rasterize. It's a little bit hidden. When I switch here to my from the modes to my switches, then I can enable this icon here. So here, it's a sun icon. And when I hover over the tooltip says, for comp layer, collapse transformations, for vector layer, continuously rasterize. The comp option, I'll talk about some other time. But for these layers, it means it continuously rasterizes it. So when we scale it, it will re-evaluate the vector information, so we always get a sharp version. So without it, and with it, without it, and with it.
So we can put it for everything so that it's always sharp.
So, no. Well, in theory, yes. So when you don't want to do anything other with this layer except for animating the default properties, then it's fine. But as soon as we apply effects, things will behave very differently. And I will show you briefly what this means. Yeah.
I have a basic question. Because
What is happening?
no, just when I zoom in and then I zoom out, the page goes to the right and I cannot see anything, you know.
That kind of depends
In
on,
the middle again.
yeah, it's
How to fit in the screen. Yeah,
this one here.
fit up. Okay.
And then it will also be centered again.
Okay.
So, let me show you why this is, so the great part is we can scale things and they will always be sharp, so they feel like they are vector. The disadvantage is when we use motion blur, it will take much longer to calculate. And now the next thing, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. Let's take this dot here, for instance, and I just create two of them. Oops, wrong shortcut. So I have these two dots. Let's say I apply an effect to it on this one, which is called, I forgot how it's called, something sweep. Light sweep. The light sweep generates this sort of shine thing over it. So now let's do the same thing on the other one as well. So I have my sweep here, the light sweep, but on light sweep. But on the second layer, let me just single view these two. On the second layer, I will turn on the sun icon, and suddenly the light sweep disappeared. Because as soon as we turn on the sun icon, the coordinate system of this layer is being ignored. All right? So when we take a look at the light sweep, so really look here, otherwise you get lost. With this layer that does not continuously rasterize, I have my light sweep, and the light sweep has a center, and the center says be at, let's say, 50 and 50. So it is from the top left corner of my layer, 50 and 50 pixels away. So this is where my center is. This layer, because it's continuously rasterized, doesn't have a center anymore. Don't ask me why, it's just the way it is. Which means the coordinate system doesn't start here, but it starts over here. Which means when I select my light sweep, the position, if I set it also to 50 and 50, is actually up here and not down here. So I could move it here to the same spot, and then it looks the same way. But they will work very differently. This one, we always work with this as one element. But the continuously rasterized is now independent from the effect. So I can move this layer behind the effect. Also, when I scale it, it behaves very differently. This one looks the way it is. I scale it up, it still looks the way it is. So nothing changes. The effect itself also scales. Even if I stretch it, I can see how the effect stretches with it. However, of course, it gets fairly blurry and unsharp the larger it becomes. The other one, when I scale it up, I can see how stretching doesn't affect it. Also, the larger I drag it, it's still the same width. It doesn't scale the width along with the layer. So many effects behave very differently when we have the sun icon turned on. And this is something that we need to be really aware of. So when we don't use any special effects, the sun icon is a big help, but when we do use these effects, some effects work very differently and might make this unusable. All right? So, let me re-import this. There are a couple of things that can also be converted from the Illustrator file, and there's one thing that I didn't show from Photoshop. I'll show some other time. So here, oh, it's turned off already. That's good, that's good, that's good. All right. Actually, I want a white background. We can, on every layer, convert the layer into a shape object inside of After Effects. So here I can right click on it and I can say create shapes from a vector layer. So when I click this, I can see how the layer is being converted. It's now not an Illustrator layer anymore. Instead, it's a shape layer. Which means if I open up the options, I have contents, a group, and the actual path and the fill. So as long as we have shapes that After Effects can create as well, so a simple stroke or a dotted stroke or a fill, these things are taking over. When we start using art brushes or complex strokes or gradients on strokes or gradients on the fills, then these things might not be converted correctly. But if it's really just simple shapes and default things that you could have done in Illustrator CS2, then these things are converted. So here I could say, oh, maybe I want to change the fill color. So I can just give it here a different fill color. However, since this is now converted, if I change something in Illustrator, it will not be updated here, because this is now an object that After Effects has created itself. All right. So, in the last 10 minutes, I will animate this really quick. I encourage you to watch what I'm doing, so you get an overview of how you could kind of build up a scene like this. All right? No. Takes too long. So I will just do it, and also fairly quickly. And remember, everything will be recorded. So I have my document here, and I changed my background color to white. Now what I want is this thing to build up from left to right. What I'm imagining in my head is kind of a dot popping up, generating a spline, so a dot pops up. As it grows back, it pushes out the spline. Then, kind of as an extension of the spline, these dots appear. As the spline goes down here, I want this screen zooming thing. As this this path grows up to here, I want this line to appear, move over, and reveal my text. When it reaches this point, the last dots here should shoot out. So I start with nothing, and everything kind of happens. By the way, I use sound effects a lot at work when I work with my colleagues together, and then we're like, all right, so this has a, and then it goes, yeah. All right, so what I usually do is I start by hiding all the layers that I don't care about at the moment. So the very first thing that I want to work with is this one here. So I hide everything else. Now I know that this one, actually I want one more layer, which is an instance of the smaller dot here. So I duplicate it and move it up here. So everything else I don't care about. So I really want to start with a small dot that kind of pumps up, goes back, and then it creates the rest. So make sure that the center point is kind of here. So at the beginning of my timeline, maybe I give it room for 10 frames or so. I make sure that my in point is set accordingly, just because it's more organized later on. Then I hit S for the scale. I want to start at 0%. I go maybe 10 frames forward. I go to, maybe 100%. Another 10 frames, I forgot to hit my thing. 0, and I can also copy paste keyframes. So here I have a keyframe that says 0, and here 2. So maybe the top one in the middle is the one that I KBC. So it's as soon as it goes down, I want this line to grow. For this line to grow, it needs to be an After Effects layer. So I go here and say create shapes from layer, and I can see, all right, so simple stroke is something that After Effects can do. After Effects can have effects applied to layers like these. So the layer 2 I don't need anymore. On this layer, I open up the options, I go into the contents, and I can see that I can add something. And what I can add is a thing that is called a trim paths, which is an effect with which I can animate at the start and the end of a path. So I start here at 0, and maybe 2 frames before this thing disappears completely, I animate the end, and then I go over to I don't know, second 3 or so, and set it to 100%. Also, at the end, I want this east. The first one can, or maybe I do it like on both of them, and I want it to shoot out quite fast, so the out influence should be 22, and at the end it should slow down a lot, maybe like 99, let's see. So here, it doesn't exist beforehand, so I set my in point accordingly. If I play this back, I have a dot that then emits sort of the line. Now, I want, as soon as the line reaches this point up here, to have these other layers appear. Let's see which ones are those. This one, and this one. So maybe to find them better, I will change them in the color and I make them yellow. And I drag them underneath the other ones that I already have. So here. So these are now the dots that I want to animate. They should also only appear starting from here, so I can just set their endpoints like this. Now I want them all to kind of bounce in, and for that I have an expression. The expression we already have. I will also talk about expressions and how to use them in another class again. So expressions, and there's an expression called overshoot. They are simply just select everything in Command C to copy it. Then I go to my expression here, to my scale here, I alt-click on it, and I paste the expression inside of it. Now, when I want to animate something, it will calculate this overshoot automatically. I will start by animating it going from 0, activating the stopwatch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames forward, and animating it to 100%. So when I disable my expression by disabling the equal sign here, I can play this back and I can see the dot just scales up, right? But when I enable the expression, then it does this nice bouncy bounce. All right? So here, it's not there, I play, there's a bouncy bounce. I can then simply just copy these keyframes and paste it on my other layers as well. So what I essentially do is, I select the scale by hitting the name, hit Command C, which will copy all the keyframes and the other, the expression. I then select the scales by command clicking on them and hit paste. It's important where my slider is because it will paste keyframes from there. No. If I do the parent, they will all be relative to the element. So if I do it like this, and I parent these other ones, they will not do it on their own. They will do it as a group. And I want it, yes, I want it separate. So here I paste it. I even want it with an offset. So I offset each one by 1 frame. So when I play it back, they all jump in differently. So like this. All right? Now, then these comes up. At this point here, I want this line to move over. So I have this line. It should end kind of here maybe at that point, so we'll animate it backwards. I hit P for the position, activate the stopwatch, go to this point here, and move it over like this. Actually, I will give it, these are 10 frames, all right. So that moves there, maybe a little bit more. Also here, the line should not be visible beforehand, so I move it over the endpoint. Here, maybe I do a 66 and 66. Hit change, play back, and I have this line that goes over. I also want this line to appear, so maybe I'll offset this by 5 frames. To move frames in time, you can use similar shortcut then to move the slider in time, but instead of command, you hold down Alt. So when I hold down Alt and use the right arrow key, I move them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames forward. So for the first 5 frames, I will let this disappear from scale on the y-axis of 0. So if I want to show another property down here, I cannot just hit S, because then I only see the scale, but I still want to see the position. So when I hit P, and I also want to see the scale, I hold down Shift and S. Shift and R to also show rotation. If I don't want to see the scale, Shift and S again. So this way you can switch up which properties we want to see. So I unconstrain the proportions because at the beginning I want my y-axis to be at 0. I activate the stopwatch here and I move to my first keyframe of the position because there I wanted to have the full size. And I switch my y-axis back to 100%. So when I animate this through, it first scales up and then moves over. Alright, synchronized with the moving over, I want my text to appear. But how would I do that? And I can do that with an alpha mask. So when I show my text here, maybe I move it directly below the line here. Maybe I rename this line so I find it better. Line and text. I need somehow an element that I can use to mask the text so it's revealed along with the slider that I have. And my text should be a little bit more to the right. Better. What I do is I will create a new solid. Color doesn't matter. It just needs to be large enough. And I can move it like this. Then I will make sure, or I rename this, that this will be my mat. I will move it directly above the text, and I will tell the text to only be visible wherever the mat is by choosing the alpha mat mode. Alright? The mat I will then parent to the line. So my mask moves along with the line and therefore reveals my text.
Oh, Jesus Christ,
So when I now scrub through here, it reveals my text because I have this green layer and the text says do only be visible wherever the green layer is.
And it has to be green or it doesn't have to?
No.
Okay.
It could be pink or black or white. Doesn't matter because we are setting the text here to use the alpha information.
Okay.
So now I'm revealing my text like this. And for the last ones here, I can then also use a similar technique that I used earlier. So also here, mat and text should not be visible before this. And before it reaches the end, I want this thing to grow just on the y-axis. So unconstrain, set this to 0, set my first keyframe, maybe 10 or 15 frames further, set this to 100. I want this to shoot, so 22 and 99. And I want the same animation to be a little bit later on as well. So here I grab my endpoints, paste the animation on the other layer as well. So when I hit U, I can see that was the wrong animation. Damn it. Nope. Copy and paste. Why is my expression still there? There we go. And this just a little bit offset. Alright. So here if I scrub through, I start with nothing, and I animate my text in.
Nice.
So that's what I meant earlier. Once you know that you can animate properties, that's all that we do in the end. We have certain scenes, images that we prepare in Photoshop or Illustrator, and then by animating properties, we reveal things. We just need to know what we want to do. So in After Effects, it doesn't do anything for you. There are no presets. There's not a button that you click and say, make this, or let this appear, or fade this. We have to always think about what we want to do. Even when we want to fade two layers, we have to animate the opacity. We cannot just say, fade this. But once you get the hang of this, then you just need to imagine what you wanted to do, and then it can do it. Yeah?
After Effects doesn't have any preset or like titles. You have to do everything.
They have title presets, but they look like PowerPoint things, so they're not nice. Sometimes they are good starting points, but you have to change so many things to make it look good that you could have also just started it on your own. Alright, so I hope you have an overview of how things work. In the upcoming days, I will send you a couple of examples of things that, or small projects that I would want us to do in our next classes. And I will then also write in the email again what my timing ideas are.
And Premiere video you told us about.
Yeah. For Premiere, if you already want to get started a bit, what you can do is go to adobe.tv or tv.adobe.com, same thing. And on there, if you scroll down, just click on Premiere Pro, and they have a lot of things like getting started, learn essentials.
And we lost your
Connection.
Oh, that is unfortunate. Yeah, I'll also send you the link.
I think the screen.
Or
It's finished.
yeah, it was like, no, that was enough. So on here on tv.adobe.com or adobe.tv, same thing. If you scroll down, you can click on Adobe Premiere. And there are really some basic essentials like, oops, getting started, learn essentials, some key techniques. You can see these videos are not so long. They're like 20 minutes, 45 minutes. And when you watch these things, you should have a really good overview of how Premiere works. Alrighty.